So we're so glad that you're here in person for this 2022 Noyce Summit. This, from what I've heard, basically, is the most anticipated panel. So we have Dr. Noyes here to speak about a little bit about the legacy of her father. She'll show some great family photos. And this panel is known as Voices of the Field. So you'll have an opportunity to talk to some colleagues, hear about their experiences, their challenges, their lessons learned. I'm so excited that they're all here. I want to give a very special shout out to one of our panelists, basically. So Dasha Morris has come all the way from Houston on the train, basically. Her flight was canceled, so please give her a hand clap. She's here. She literally just arrived 15 minutes ago at the hotel, so that was extremely amazing to us. We just want to give her a shout out for her commitment to the program. And then I'll just give, I would say very briefly, some of the accomplishments of Dr. Noyes. There are several in her illustrious career that is continuing, basically. But she received her undergraduate degree in biochemistry from Harvard University. She received her doctorate of medicine in internal medicine, actually, at Stanford University. And then she did her residency in Minnesota. And then I'll just mention a very high-profile NSF-funded project that Dr. Noyes actually did. So this was known as PALMS, and actually was a statewide STEM improvement initiative within the state of Massachusetts. Dr. Noyes is an author. She's published 3 high-profile books, most recently one about the COVID crisis. She is an educator. She has also led the Noyes Foundation and the legacy of her father and been doing a lot of STEM education work across the nation. If you could please welcome Dr. Penny Noyce to the podium to hear her remarks. We're so glad that you're here. Thank you so much.
Buddy, it is such an honor to be here among you. So many beautiful and committed young people and pretty young people who are dedicated to getting our kids excited about STEM. And I'm going to have to put on my glasses and tell you that one of the perks of having the last name Noyce is when I go around the country, a lot of people thank me for this program, which has nothing to do with me or my family except that it's named after my father. All right, there we go. So I apologize also to those of you who have heard this talk before. You can just look at your phones or something. So Bob Noyce was the co-inventor of the integrated circuit, the computer chip that is in all our phones and cars and telescopes and spaceships. He was a co-founder of Fairchild Semiconductor and later of Intel, and some people called him the mayor of Silicon Valley. All his life, he was an optimist. He was cheerful and confident, and he really believed in people. And those characteristics gave him charisma and allowed him to be a leader because he always made people realize they could do something they never thought they could do, whether it was skiing down a steep hill or inventing a new electronic device. But before all that, he was a Midwestern kid growing up in the Depression, the son of a line of preachers that reached all the way back to the Mayflower. And here you see his 2 angelic big brothers in an attitude of prayer. He was the third of 4 boys, and as American as they come, he loved to read popular mechanics, and he wrote for a school assignment, "My hobby is making things. I like it because it's useful." He once mounted an old car battery to the handlebars of his bike so his hands wouldn't get frostbite as he delivered papers in winter in Iowa. And he mounted a washing machine motor and propeller to the back of his sled, hoping that it would drive it uphill so he wouldn't have to pull it. And he always said that his main motivation for inventing things was that he was lazy. But in this case, it didn't work because he mounted it backwards and it pulled. But the most famous of my father's childhood projects was a glider that he and his brother Gaylord built when he was 12 years old. They followed pictures in the Encyclopedia Britannica, and they organized all the neighborhood kids. One kid brought struts for the glider from his father's furniture store, and they even talked my grandmother into sewing the canvas for the wings. They tried pulling my father's littlest brother in the glider behind a car down Main Street, and he just bumped along, but then they took it up onto the top of a garage, and the only one brave enough to get in the pilot's area and hold on and run off the garage was my dad. And it did fly for a few seconds, and no bones were broken, but nobody else wanted to take their turn afterwards. Bob Noyce was the third boy in his family to graduate as valedictorian from his high school, a small high school, just as World War II was ending, and he felt the world lay open before him, that it was going to be an American century. He went to Grinnell College, partly on a swimming scholarship and partly on a scholarship for the sons of ministers. And he got involved in musical theater and radio theater, and he decided he thought about majoring in history, but he thought that would be too hard, so he took the lazy route and decided to major in math and physics instead. And things were really going very well until he almost threw it all away. His fraternity brothers wanted to hold a luau, so they asked him and another local boy to acquire a pig. And they snuck off through the Iowa fields at night and stole a piglet, a young pig, from a local farmer, and brought it back to where their fraternity brothers slaughtered it in the shower. And the next morning, feeling remorse, my father went back to see the farmer and offered to pay for the pig, although I don't know how he would have, because he had no money and got by on giving haircuts and sewing, mending clothes for his classmates. Anyway, the farmer was having none of it. He wanted to press felony charges, but my father's physics professor went to bat for him, and he ended up with just a suspension for a semester. And Leslie Berlin points out in her biography that if he had gotten kicked out of college, no other college would have taken him, and that would have been the end of that. So he went to New York City, where he worked in an accounting firm and hated it, and then he came back and finished up at Grinnell, and in that last semester was when he first heard about the semiconductor, the transistor, and he said he was really fascinated by it. He couldn't figure out how it worked at first. Then he went to MIT, where nobody was working on semiconductors. He worked on solid-state physics. He really broke his leg very badly after he learned to ski in New Hampshire. I mean, he broke his arm. He broke his leg later when I was a kid. So then he went to Philco. I think I'm supposed to have been showing you some pictures as we do this. Okay, this is my father playing the oboe in his school marching band. And, here he is. This is around the time he went to Grinnell, I think, or MIT, actually. And then go on to one more. Anyway, he worked for Philco, working on semiconductors. And then one day he got a call from William Shockley, inviting him to come to California to join a brand new company called Shockley Semiconductor. Here he is with his brother Gaylord. Okay, this is the one I wanted you to see. One of those people is me. And this was in Philadelphia before we moved to California when he went to join Shockley. So my father said, Shockley was one of the inventors of the transistor. And my father said talking to Shockley was like talking to God when he got that phone call. And he was invited to go take a psychological test. Shockley was really into that, which showed that he would be good in the lab, but would never be a manager. And there are people who would say he never was. He was a leader, but maybe not a manager. So then he went out to California for a job interview, and on the way, this just shows you about his confidence, he bought a house in Los Altos. So, or at least he put down a down payment. The problem with William Shockley, though, besides the fact that he later turned out to be a racist and a eugenicist, was that he was a terrible manager. He hired the best and brightest, and then he kept them on a short leash. And once my father came up with an idea and showed it to him, Shockley told him it would go nowhere and to focus on what he was doing. Later, the Japanese scientist Leo Esaki won a Nobel Prize for his work on the tunnel diode, which my father had sketched out in his notebook. So the moral of the story there is, don't let some authority talk you out of an idea that you believe in. After about a year, in 1957, the young scientist Shockley had recruited rebelled in a move that became famous throughout Silicon Valley. They broke away to raise capital and start their own company, or at least their own branch of Fairchild Camera and Instrument. And if we get another picture, I will show you the famous picture of the Traitorous Eight, as they were called. Okay, that's William Shockley. One more. The Traitorous Eight. These were the first 8 employees of Fairchild Semiconductor. My father is the one in the front. He was the most reluctant to leave Shockley, actually, because Shockley liked him, and he was kind of a loyal guy. So he has had badge number 8, but he was their leader once they existed. Their first big sale of semiconductors was to IBM. My father promised their delivery before they built them, knew how to build them. But luckily, unlike Elizabeth Holmes of Theranos, they came through and actually built them. And the lesson there is to believe in your team. A couple of years later, my father sketched out another idea in his notebook. This time, when he heard that Jack Kilby at Texas Instruments was working on something similar, he hurried to flesh out his ideas. The idea of printing all the electronic components needed for a circuit on a single chip of silicon, the integrated circuit. Jack Kilby's invention was similar, and the two of them shared the patent through their lives. And in fact, Jack Kilby was awarded a Nobel Prize for the invention after my father died, which was his second missed Nobel Prize, but he didn't care at that point. Jack Kilby's invention had wiring going from one component to the other, sort of looked like a daddy long legs. And the difference with my father's integrated circuit was the components were attached by copper printed onto the chip, so it could be mass-produced, and lazy people didn't have to put the wires carefully from one place to another. That's what allowed the chip to, every 2 years, double the number of components on it. So it was 2, and then 4, and then 200, and now a couple billion components can be put on a single chip. It actually took a couple of years for the integrated circuit to take off, but then it became very important as part of the space program and then into industry. 10 years later, with Fairchild Camera and Instrument in New York beginning to drag down its only profitable branch, my father and his partner, Gordon Moore, moved again to start Intel. My father said in his resignation letter to the Fairchild executives that he wanted to start again. Fairchild was too big. He wanted something that would be small and agile. It's funny because Gordon Moore says, we knew from the beginning we were going to be big, but that's not what my dad told me. Their business plan was 2 pages long, and it took them less than 48 hours to raise the capital because of their reputation. Shortly afterwards, a young engineer, Ted Hoff, came to my father with an idea sketched out in his notebook, saying instead of creating different chips for all these different applications, why don't we make a chip that you can actually program? And he didn't know how to do it, and my father, probably remembering Shockley, said, okay, you don't have to work on what you're working on, you can go work on this, I'll support you. And that led to the first microprocessor, or microcomputer. So you know the rest. Intel grew, and we can keep having more pictures if anybody wants to put them up. Yeah, there's my dad. Oh, yeah. You know who this other guy is, right? Intel grew to become the world's largest manufacturer of semiconductors, which it no longer is, by the way. My father became chair, then vice chair, but he was an industry leader, often testifying to Congress about how to keep the semiconductor business from succumbing to Japanese competition the way consumer electronics and automobiles had. He also was a mentor to many people in the Valley, like Steve Jobs, who used to drop by for supper, unexpected. And Congress eventually responded, establishing Semitech, a government industry consortium. And Semitech, the problem was it needed a leader that could convince all these very competitive companies to work together. And finally, my father, who was on the search committee, recognized that he was the only one who could really do that. So he left his beloved California and went to Texas. He was there for 2 years and decided he told them he was resigning. He felt that things were really on a firm footing, and he was going to go off and spend his time doing the things he liked to do, like scuba diving and skiing, and we could have another picture. But 2 weeks after that announcement, while he was swimming in his backyard pool, he had a cardiac arrest and died at 62. The family went on to establish the Noyce Foundation in his name, and with his bequest, he had decided he wanted to set up a foundation for K through 12 math and science education. And we ran it for 25 years. We actually sunsetted the foundation in 2015, which is that we gave away all the money. At once we had even partnered with NSF on a project. I just want to say that. And as you know, we had nothing to do with the Noyce Scholars Program, which was started by Congress, by I think a congressman from San Jose. So I do want to say one more thing. My father mentored Steve Jobs, but he never became adept with a personal computer. He never had an iPod or an iPhone. He never saw the internet. And sometimes I really wonder what he would think of what the world has become with all of us glued to our devices. On the one hand, he loved every innovative gadget he ever came across, and he always wanted to see the newest thing. But he didn't like to watch sports on TV, he liked to play. He didn't like to read adventure books, he liked to have adventures. He valued knowledge, he valued thinking. He honored anybody in any walk of life who was good at what they did, whether they were a potter or a landscaper or a flight instructor. And I know he would have been horrified at the willful ignorance, the passive belief and passionate fury that we see growing in America now. So that's my appeal to you educators. Remember when America had confidence in itself, in what it could do to make the world better? When it was optimistic, when we thought we could shine out in the world and be an example. So please, please help your students pick up their heads and look around, see the challenges, be optimistic, think about what they can do, figure out how to help the world and all its infuriating and delightful people. Help young people resist misinformation, help them respect knowledge and expertise, and help them develop their own. Thank you. So now I get to talk to all these lovely people. And first of all, I'm going to ask you to each just take one sentence to tell us your name, where and what you teach, and one sentence about your school and community. And then if you like, you can add on to that one word that describes your teaching experience for this 2021-2022 school year. And so it won't be unfair. I'm not going to start with you. I'll start at that end.
You're my favorite.
All right. My name is Jose Garcia Villar, and the name of I teach in Bronx, New York, and the name of my school is Mad Haven Village Prep High School. One special thing about my school is the community of my school is 70% Hispanic and 30% African American and West Africa as well. One word to describe my teaching experience, I would say grateful.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Hi, I'm Dasha Morris. I'm from Houston, Texas. I teach at Spring Branch ISD. I teach Algebra 1, and one word to describe my school year would be dynamic.
My name is Jed Tugas. I am a first-generation descendant of the Fort Peck Sioux and Assiniboine tribes. But I was born and raised in Ronan, Montana, which is part of the Flathead Reservation. I teach high school science, broad field, so that's all of them. Let's see, one word to describe my year. It was worthwhile.
Good morning. My name is Dario Guadino. I am from Omaha, Nebraska, from the University of Nebraska, Omaha, and I teach math and computer science in Omaha Public Schools. One word that would describe my first couple years teaching was questions, given the pandemic that we were in.
Yeah.
Hi, everyone. My name is Ashley Mezzano. I'm from Duval County Public Schools and the Jacksonville Teacher Residency Program from University of North Florida. I teach biology at Mandarin High School, but for the past couple years have also taught middle school at Westside Middle. What made me so grateful about that experience in middle school was I got to see a lot of different perspectives. Over 70% were free or reduced lunch students. But I was like really amazed by how passionate each kid was. And that's the word that I would choose also, is just passionate to describe my 2021-2022 experience, especially with all the programs that I've been able to be a part of, especially the one-year residency program with JTI.
Yade Bennett, good morning. My name is Camilla Brown, and I'm from Bloomfield, New Mexico, and I teach 8th grade science. My community is interesting because we're separated by a few miles of towns, but in my town, we have 33% Native, 33% Hispanic, and 33% white. And 6 miles over the hill, it's 80% white and 20% everybody else. And 13 miles to the west, it's almost 85% white and then like 15% Native and then the rest. So, you know, a few 20 square miles, it's a lot different. The communities are really different. But I like mine because we're very, very diverse. My word for the year would still be fun. I had a lot of fun with the kids, with the staff, just learning and becoming broke, buying all these third-party apps, and nonetheless, I really had a great time with it, and that's what brings me back every day, is because the sense of the adventure and what's coming in the door the next day, and what I look like coming in the door the next day. So I enjoyed that.
All right, from now on, you get to volunteer, whether to answer the question, but if you don't volunteer, I will call on you. So what was the most significant thing that you learned in your Noyce program?
I guess I'll start with this one. I always think back, was it Finding Dory? Just keep swimming would be kind of as much as you are going to learn in your teacher prep program, it is not going to prepare you for actually being in the classroom. And just remember that sometimes being there and present is the most important thing for those students.
I definitely agree with Jed. I had a one-year residency program, so from day one, I was actually in the classroom in a Title I school through Jacksonville Teacher Residency and Andrew Jackson High School, and by and large, the most impactful experience I had my first year in residency was just being there the whole year, even when COVID started and I was online with my teacher. Having that mentor was so instrumental, and I've continued to seek out mentors and be mentors wherever I go, just because I remember how important that was for me. And that was the impact of the Noyce legacy for me, is just the importance of mentorship.
Mm-hmm. I would say that with my teacher residency program, I'm from University of Houston with Teach Houston, the Access program, and I feel like one of the things that really stuck with me throughout my whole time teaching last year was to be culturally responsive and inclusive of all our different backgrounds, and to not only welcome it, but to celebrate it with all the different types of students that you're going to get walking through your doors. I'm pretty sure we're all here because we have very diverse schools, and celebrating those differences and learning how to bring those into the lesson and bring those into the classroom make all the difference with your kids.
That's true. Did you want to say something?
Oh, okay. No, really, it was just a matter of, celebrating who I am, because I clearly am different from everybody here, but it was nice to be that student or be that teacher for the students, like, oh, they look like me. Because where I'm from, there aren't very many women science teachers at all, and there aren't very many Native American science teachers because it's a taboo to be a Native American in science. And so, it was a hard-fought battle with my parents, but still, it was something I wanted to do, and I want to spread that and tell these kids it is okay to bridge modernism with the traditional. There's a way to do that, and there's a way to do it respectfully, and I wanted to show them and have my kids know and understand I know what that's like, to have that constant battle with your family that it's not right, but it's okay, So with this program, they allowed me to celebrate who I was and still pass on who I am and still have somebody who knows more than I do. And it's awesome because there's always somebody who knows more. And it's fun to find them, and they teach you and you teach them. And it's always this great exchange of information, and it's fun.
Thanks.
For me personally, first of all, I agree with everything everybody else has shared. I think we all have some similar experiences, but the Noyce program, one of the most powerful things I got from it was just the power of exposure and trying new things and going out there, having new experiences. As an undergraduate in a Track 1 program in Noyce, I tried a whole variety of different fields, and that helped me fall in love with the STEM fields and kind of learn things that I didn't know before. Now, as a teacher, this translates to what I'm doing now because I'm able to do that for my students, and I'm able to expose them at an early age to all these very neat things that otherwise they wouldn't have the capacity to do. And I think that overall is going to help foment their love for STEM and help them, get new places in the future.
All right.
Yeah, my experience.
Yes, go ahead.
Yes, so I became a teacher because of the Noyce program at City College of New York. I was going to become a civil engineer first, but I didn't make it there. So I was offered opportunities to become a teacher. And, I grew up in church, teaching Sunday school, so I always had that passion of working with youth and teaching. So I said, this is the opportunity. And then, all the resources that were provided for me, the support, the teamwork, I really value that a lot. Working with other, colleagues, and especially, like many of you have mentioned, being placed in a residency school with a cooperating teacher that will walk you through the process, And I was placed, I will never forget his name, Mr. Wilson. He was a geologist. On the field, he knew it all about that. And he was very, very supportive to me. Most of the students that I taught, I was, student teaching were Dominican. I'm Dominican as well. So I could really connect with all of them, and they saw an example in me, and I could talk the language. And being there with that cooperating teacher, he gave me the floor a couple of times. When I felt nervous, he took on, the classroom and things like that until I felt comfortable by doing it by myself. So I'm really grateful for that, and that's a key part of the Noyce and being paired with that teacher there.
I think we've heard a little bit of this, but I'm going to ask you, what was the most useful piece of advice that you received when you started teaching in your own classroom?
I'll start. I feel like the thing that I found most useful was to not be afraid to step out of the box, to not be afraid to try something new. When you are with your cooperating teacher for so long, you kind of start to mimic everything that they do. And sometimes you're afraid when you join a team or with your PLC to step out of the box and try something different and try something new. And you're almost afraid to let your students down. You're afraid to disappoint yourself. You're also afraid to disappoint everybody around you. And I realized, there's nothing to be afraid of. As long as you have the best of intentions for your students, getting out there and trying different things, even if it completely bombs, is always a learning opportunity to know what not to do or what to do next time. And I feel like getting the confidence to do that, to step outside of the box and try to change lessons and do what we were taught within our program made the world of a difference for me and my students.
This is going to sound a little counterintuitive at first, but I remember when my mentor sat me down and said to take care of myself. And her logic there was, if I wasn't taking care of myself and I wasn't making sure that I was calm and ready, there was no way I'd be able to lead the next generation of scientists and teachers. So mental health is something that I'm really passionate about in my classroom, not only in the weekly make sure to check in sort of way, but in the actual let's all take some deep breaths. If I start to get frustrated, I take a deep breath, I do the countdown exercises, and I just let my students watch me. And it was really amazing to have that advice from another teacher to just take care of myself. Because by the end of the year, I saw my students, without even being prompted, actually just going to the calm down corner, taking some deep breaths. It was really funny because I would do this thing where I'd be like, and then at the end of the year, I would see my students copying my mannerisms. And I thought that was pretty funny. I thought that was kind of cool to see. But that was honestly the most important advice I got my first year.
I would have to agree with her. I think the most important piece of advice I got was to just empathize with your students. Before you dive deep into content, before you start thinking about how far you're going to get in the school year, you just have to connect with students and get to know them, get to know what they're going through, get to know what you're going through. It works both ways, especially I think I started a month before the pandemic hit. So when we came back, everybody, was in a whole different situation than we were before. So just focusing on the human aspect of teaching before you worry about lesson planning and curriculum planning, I think is a great investment of your time.
I think for me, it's about being your authentic self. Kids can sense when you're not being truthful. I'm a gay man who lives in a rural reservation in Montana. I'm the first openly gay teacher that we've had at our school. The kids know that. and just being there and being open and willing to have that conversation with students. They see that, and hopefully they understand that I'm there and willing to listen, and I'm there for them.
What is the most impactful challenge that the student population you're working with faces, and how is your experience in preparation helping you address that challenge? You already talked about the challenge
I guess the big part still is in my part of the world, in rural New Mexico and Southwest Colorado. We still have places that don't have the basic needs. We don't have running water. We don't have electricity, let alone phone service. So a lot of our big challenges when pandemic hit was, where do you go to school? You know, where do we even have what we need? We have large family groups who are living in family units, you know, the aunt right here, the uncle, and all of this, and you have these children who are going to school, but they share things. They share the computer. They go to school in shifts. They go to school during certain times of the day and things like that. Or you have kids driving 30 miles to the nearest chapter house or the nearest whatever who had Wi-Fi to sit outside for 6 hours and then go home and, you know, selectively coming to school because they don't have gas to do so. And so a big part of it really was to play catch up when we decided to come back to school, because we started online, then we kind of went hybrid, and then we went on. Well, now I teach online and in person. I do that both, but it was just to play catch up with these kids and to get them back on track. And it's still a challenge now. You know, I still have students who have to be online because, like, the dorm system is still closed because of pandemic, so they still can't come to school, or they'll come every other day or whatever. And you know, there's just so many different challenges that, you know, we weren't prepared for. We still aren't. We have no answers for some of those things. And they live in these communities that are in between cities, you know, that have nothing, and it's hard to get out there. But, you know, when they're there, you try your best to, like, squish all that stuff into them and be like, okay, we'll see you when we see you, you know. But it's just being really patient with them and just knowing and understanding what their situations are and what they're coming in the door with and what they're going to leave with. And but even now, what are we, 3 years into this, and we're still trying to work out the kinks. We're still trying to find the answers. And soon, hopefully, in the next 10 years, we'll get it right. But, you know, we'll get there. All right.
I can go next. The most impactful challenge about the population I work with and what they face is lack of motivation and low academic skills. And one of the things that I, brought into up front is my experience, my background. I went through a lot while going into school in terms of academics, learning a new language, and struggling to pass my class with high grades due to the language barrier. So I connect with many of them, and I see myself in them. I think and act how I want teachers to support me back when I was a high school student and was learning English. So I see myself, and I think about how I wanted other teachers and how other teachers treated me when I was a student before. So I'm a very flexible and optimistic teacher. I always believe in them. I tell them that. I tell them, I believe in you. You can do it. They come with excuses. I cannot do it. I tell them, you're going to graduate. You got to do this. We're going to make it. I always, instill that in them. I believe in them. And I give them a lot of chances to do things and offer them my support with a lot of patience. I try to practice that a lot, developing my patience, being very patient with them. I try to understand them and listen to them. In addition to that, I had the advantage to study for my master's at a museum, the American Museum of Natural History. And that museum has opened doors for me to continue visiting with my students to engage them in science. So I take advantage of that opportunity to organize field trips and have some of my professors and scientists come and talk to my students. In this way, they feel more motivated to learn and aspire to improve, do better, and continue in higher education.
I'll say that one of the things that you touched on as well is just being authentically you, being yourself and being able to build those connections will give you the biggest impact with your students. In my school district, it's the lack of support, whether it be at home, whether it be a lack of support because there's language barriers or with their parents, technology support, lack of resources, food. There's so many things that these students are lacking that you have to figure out, where can I fill in the gaps? Where can I help them? If they're behind because of COVID, there's so many things. And in order to help them, you have to be authentically you, because it's almost like you're dating somebody, and if you're a completely fake person the first few months, you did not build an authentic connection with that person. And then when you are truly yourself, they want nothing to do with you. But if you are yourself from the beginning and they can build that connection with you, they'll trust you, they'll respect you, they'll listen to you. And you can figure out, what support do they need from me? Do they need me to make a phone call to the district to help them with their technology? Do they need me to talk to another teacher because they just can't, they don't know how to properly communicate with other adults because they've been spoken down to, or whatever it is it mental health? Do they need help with just listening? Do they just need somebody to listen to them? I feel like being authentically you will make the biggest impact on your students and any challenges that they're facing.
Yeah, I have to agree with everything that everybody's saying, is being authentic. The community that I come from, I live on a reservation in Montana. It's a bit different than the other reservations in that it was opened up for homesteading in the early 1900s. So there's a large population of non-native individuals that live on the reservation, which created conflict. We still have that conflict right now. We're going through some water rights discussions. And so what we also have is a lot of reservations in Montana, and there's a lot of transient students that move between those different reservations. So a lot of what I deal with my school population is 60% Native American. We are the largest Native American school in our reservation. And growing up, I grew up my mother's Native American, my dad's white. And so I kind of always lived in these two different worlds where I don't present very Native, but all of my friends were Native, so I didn't really ever fit in very well in any one of those spheres. And that's what I see a lot of my students going through is we have a lot of mixed families, and it's hard to be separated from your identity in one place and then connected in another, and how to transition between those two things. And so a lot of what I try to do is going back to that, being authentic and understanding that who you are and what you believe, there's value in that, and you don't need to change that to become a scientist. You can bring that in and attach it and work with it, and that's going to make you that much more centered and able to be a wonderful person.
Yeah, I definitely agree with everything about authenticity. At first, I was a little nervous to add. I tried to make a bunch of diverse books, but I was nervous, especially being a teacher in Florida, about including queer literature, even though I'm also bisexual. I'm in a straight presenting relationship. There's no real way to really open up that conversation without raising some questions. But just through having those books on the bookshelf and being honest, it's I love The Owl House. I love Heartstopper. That Netflix show, it's great. It really helped me connect, especially with my trans BIPOC students, in a way that they had never really felt seen before, especially because I live very close to the Bible Belt, if not inside it. And it was really, really important just to have one teacher who understood what neo-pronouns were and understood what LGBTQA, all of those, all the acronyms, and it really made the whole difference there.
I don't even want to ask this question, but what is one thing you did to ease the COVID challenges for your students in this school year, this past school year? I know that.
I guess for me, we were only remote for 3 months in 2019. We were lucky enough to come back. Well, I shouldn't say lucky. We came back and I taught in person and remote at the same time, so I'd have kids on the computer and the kids in the classroom. But I think what COVID taught me is that there needed to be places for this authentic idea of making connections, of those students being allowed to make a connection. You've been put in a room and isolated and all of this stuff for however long. And yes, we need to get through this content, but at the same time, we just need to get to know each other and be present and hear each other. And so I actually moved to a lot of project-based learning that had these group learning routines. And so through those group learning routines, we were able to establish ways of working within the classroom that were constructive and collaborative. And some days it worked, some days it didn't. But at the same time, I just took it for what it was and took it as a learning experience. And if you are interested in learning about, I would say project-based learning is excellent. There are things about it that I would definitely tweak. But if you're looking for some ways to, I don't know, create some structure within your classroom that's student-led, there are amazing ways to go about that.
I think one of the challenges that I struggled with a little bit upon returning and being 50% online, 50% in person is I think learning loss was evident and it's real, and unfortunately it was also inequitable. You could definitely notice that some students had more severe cases of learning loss than others. So that was definitely a challenge when students started to come back into the schools after school closings. But as educators, we just try to do whatever we can every day to manage that. And for me, that meant really focusing on the human aspect of the students first, because learning is going to come second to them. You have to meet all their needs, and after the students were isolated for so long, it's really challenging to get them to start doing trigonometry all over again out of nowhere. So just focusing on their needs, tailoring learning to them, and just thinking outside the box. You don't have to do everything by the dot. You have a little bit of liberty to do things differently, however you feel best for your students.
I actually got the luxury of doing my teaching program through COVID. So I got an amazing experience with Teach Houston through the pandemic, and going into the school, I realized very quickly that not everybody got that same amazing experience. And seeing that made me realize that I need to be able to take a step back, and I deal with high schoolers, so getting to understand them, getting to know them, letting them gripe about what was your experience like during the pandemic? And they say, my teacher never logged in, or my parents never helped me with homework, or I don't even know how I'm here right now. Just listening to them and getting to understand what they're missing, and then taking my lessons for each individual class and making sure that I differentiated them, because one class might need something totally different from the other period, but even student to student, individual, some people, although you think we're in high school, you should be able to do this, they need multiplication charts. They don't know 2 times 2 off the top of their head. And so getting to hear them express just how they feel, how the pandemic went for them, what was their schooling like, what was it like at home, it helps so much for me whenever sitting down to plan a lesson or to create something. How do I go about making this not so frustrating for them, because I'm sure they're completely overwhelmed and they're missing something in there somewhere.
For me, one of the things that I did to ease their experience during the pandemic was being flexible. In terms of getting to Google Classroom, trying to submit a work, or Mr. Garcia, I couldn't upload this assignment on Google Classroom. Just text it to me. That's fine. Just send me an email. Show your screen. Put it in the chat. Things like that otherwise will make them very frustrated on top of everything that's going on. All that I expect from them is to log in. They're doing more than enough by logging in through those very difficult times. I had students with COVID and they still log in. So for me, being flexible was key, and I know they appreciate that.
Did any of you have all in-person lessons this year, or did all of you have some online?
All in person?
All in person.
In person.
Almost all in person.
This
I think
year,
we
yeah.
might have been like semi-hybrid like the first couple years, but like the first couple weeks, but mostly in person for me too.
And you had hybrid.
Well, I taught in school, but I had an online section that
I
I
see.
taught like at the end of the day. So because we
see.
had kids who preferred it that way.
I
And so
see. So do you consider yourself an innovator in your school community, and how?
I definitely think innovation is at the forefront of teaching, especially as somebody from like a STEM background. It's really, really important. I learned pretty quickly that there weren't a lot of materials to go around, and even though like there were things, COVID kind of made the whole getting those things difficult. So I actually put together a school library. I was like, well, our library is closed down. I'm going to find some books. And I had my students tell me what books they liked. And I wasn't expecting to get any books at first, but what I learned is that kids love reading. They love it. And I was able to, just by having books that were their grade level, like their reading level at first, I had kids going from Dogman to like warrior novels in the span of like 1 year. And for context, Dogman's like at a second grade reading level, which is where those kids were in the beginning of the year. And then by the end of the year, they were reading almost their grade level. They were reading like books 7th grade level, loving it. Like their favorite book was the Warrior Cat series. And it was amazing just to see what having books in a classroom can do. Even though I was a science teacher, it was phenomenal. And putting like donors choose projects together. If a kid's like, I really hate the way that this room seems dingy, like the AC's broken, like what are we gonna do about it? Just getting like a donors choose project going for like Febreze, and like it sounds so sad, but like that's what I did, and my kids loved it. They were like, oh, I want to be the person to come into the classroom first because I get to control this Febreze can. And that was how I got kids into the classroom. I let them pick like the daily scent on the wax candle, and they thought it was so cool. So I took like this very intensely negative experience and made it a positive one just by listening to what kids wanted and honestly needed. And it was a really very like complicated experience. Like proud of my students, sad for the school, but like happy that I was able to do something about it. Definitely an interesting experience.
Yeah, I think
okay.
I think innovation is definitely something we should all focus on, especially as educators. Personally, as a new teacher, I don't know if I consider myself an innovator yet, but I think there's definitely things that I'm trying to do to help my students, especially in terms of giving them opportunities that they haven't had yet. I recently graduated with my master's in computer science, and computer science is an up and rising field of study, and schools contact you immediately to, hey, we have an opening in this area, we have an opening in this area. But for me, the most important thing was staying at my school and giving my students that have never had an inch of experience with computer science the opportunity to engage with it. So next year, I'll have a one-man department for computer science, but I think that's what it's about. It's just giving students opportunity, especially the school I work with. A lot of them have never done anything with computer science, and a lot of them can't tell you what computer science is, but if we want to get them excited about STEM, we have to give them those opportunities first.
It's funny because innovative is supposed to be going forward, but for me it was going backwards to keep it classic. Every month there's like a theme, like Native American month or Latinx month, all of these things. So with the kids, as we would get into these months, we would have a segue, and we would learn and discover famous Native American scientists or people who invented and reinvented a whole bunch of things. And so the funny thing was we do little segue projects, but we go back to making a poster and hanging it on the wall. then do gallery walks. And these are 8th graders, and they're just like, I don't want to do it. I'm like, well, do it. But then when we did it, they were more than excited to tell what they did. Look at mine, mine's over here, and it just kind of went back to being just really simple about things like that. And whenever we would do experiments, nobody liked to talk about nothing in front of everybody, but when everyone was moving around the room and talking to each other amongst the groups, everything, they were okay talking as long as everybody else was talking. So, for me, it was just like going back to the beginning, just slowing it down and being like, okay, you know what, you do know something, but tell everybody what you know. And, it's those little segues, like I said, culturally, it was fun to find these things for these kids. They learned that the flat screen TV was invented by a Spanish inventor or a Mexican inventor. They're like, what? No. I'm like, yeah, for real, go read it. And so there's these just little things, and you find these little pockets, and they just get excited about it. And in my class, I always weave in my Navajo culture. So there's always a story about something. So the biggest was when we hit the astronomy. They just did not know there was such a thing as Native American mythology. I'm like, oh, well, you have no idea, And so I bring in these little facets, and I have these other students, and I always invite them, what did your grandma say, or what did your grandpa say? And all of these students, they have these stories, and we'll sit a minute and we'll listen to each other. And that's what it is tying everyone back together, because as a culture, family is really important. That's where it all is for us. And you can see it in my community. Everyone is a family unit. So in my class, that's what I want, is I want everyone to feel like they can share everything and be cool with it. And if they don't like it, they can say it, but that's all they can do is just say it and be like, I don't like it. Say, cool, all right, who's next, But everyone hears each other. And so I guess for me, like I said, the innovation is going backwards and to creating that family, and just to create these pockets where people feel safe, where they should feel safe all the time. So that was mine.
Thanks. I want to be sure that there's plenty of time for people in the audience to ask questions, but I'm going to ask a couple of things. There's one question is, knowing what you would know now, what is one course you would design for your teacher education program? What's something that you wish you could have learned about before you went into the classroom?
I would immediately throw my students to the sharks. There's no experience like teaching a class. Until you're in the classroom and you are responsible for the daily tasks that those kids are doing, it's really hard to understand what teaching is. So be kind to yourself the first couple of years, because it's probably going to be a little rough. But yeah, I think it's just, yeah.
No courses, just stick them in the
Well,
classroom.
no, it would be it would be an experience where they would need to kind of take the role of the teacher on more than just having that your advisor teacher.
Uh-huh.
Yes. As somebody who, like the way that my residency model worked, it was super unique. So I was in the classroom from day one and was co-teaching, watching the teacher teach for most of them. But I actually taught an AP bio class from day one. Mm-hmm. I definitely agree that that was probably the most useful experience. Uh-huh. In terms of experiences I wish I had during my residency, part of me wishes I had an entire class that was just in a completely different language, but every single time, through every week, when you were finally starting to be okay, I think I get it, the teacher would just start speaking an entirely different language. Because that's one experience I never had, and it's something I'm really trying to learn. I have a friend who knows his indigenous Mexican language, his Mexican Spanish, and then American English, and I'm just amazed by how much I just pick up from just talking to him sometimes. And I wish I had had an experience that allowed me to know a useful language instead of just Latin. 'Cause I was not a risk taker when I was in high school, and that's something I want to be. I want to be a risk taker as a teacher.
I go next. For me, knowing what I know now, if I could design one class, what would be the focus? I was thinking about developing a curriculum map. The units that need to be taught for a specific subject, in my case, like earth science, and a rough outline of the time to be spent on each topic for each particular unit. That would be very amazing, and especially now that we're talking on cultural responsive teaching, looking at that curriculum map and see what type of lessons could be included that could connect with students' identity and culture, that would be a great class.
I would say networking, like the importance of networking as a teacher, not just with your team, not just with your department, but your entire school, cross subjects, because you'll never know like things that you'll learn from other teachers. You can learn a new language from another teacher. You can learn what they're learning in other classes. And within my school, we have a micro school. So it's a school where it's all project-based learning, and science, history, and English all cross and create big projects for entire units. And those students move to the exact same class together, and so they work together constantly. And I just feel like the importance of networking and learning how to properly network, whether it be here in this type of setting or even like outside of your school within your district, will take you far, because you will never stop learning new things, and you'll constantly be gaining skills on how to communicate with different people at different levels, how to get new lessons, how to do new icebreakers with your students, and just constantly learning is based on who you surround yourself with.
What's one piece of advice you'd give NSF after their experience, 20 years of preparing teachers like you? What advice can you give to the funders, which is the Congress, and the developers like the National Science Foundation, or to all the individual Noyce projects preparing teachers out there?
I can start real quick. My advice would be to continue doing whatever you're doing to support teachers across the country with resources and preparation. Another advice I'll offer is to keep opening opportunities for aspiring teachers to join the program and keep up the good work.
So first of all, I would like to say thank you, not only to the funders, but everyone in the audience, because this work is not easy. Just out of curiosity, I actually gave you guys a question. I was like, how would you describe teaching in one word? And most of you guys said challenging, which I thought was interesting, but a lot of you guys also said words like innovation. A lot of you guys said worthwhile, fun, interesting. And I think it's really important to not lose that light, to not forget the reason why we do what we do. For those of us who have the capability, we're on Capitol Hill, if anyone has any sort of connections to politicians, please continue to think of our BIPOC students and teachers, our LGBT students and teachers, and for those of you guys who may not fit those categories, be an ally, add those books in your classroom, stick up for what's right. Hopefully together we can make meaningful impacts. And I know that everyone in this audience is in the teaching profession because that's what they want to do, is to make an impact. Don't lose sight of that, because we're a community. So we look to your right, look to your left. There's at least somebody here that has your back.
I would say, yes, thank you as well. But also just continue to provide opportunities, because this, like, for me, like I was in college I was, oh my goodness, I can't speak right now. I was getting my degree in technology, and it was in the middle of the pandemic, and I didn't see a way I was gonna get a job because everybody was unemployed or becoming unemployed very shortly. And so the opportunity the Noyce program gave me was to continue my education, to become a teacher, to get a job in a field where people were dropping like flies, and actually find something that I love way more than I ever thought I would. And I'm so glad. I do not want to be sitting in an office from 9 to 5 in my little cubicle. And so continuing to provide those opportunities to people, like, they really do change your lives. They've changed my kids' lives. And so if given the opportunity to go back and continue to do more like fun, further educate teachers, I would really appreciate that.
Yeah, I have to agree, and thank you. I was actually very honored to get this. I didn't an invitation to come down. I think of myself as just a regular teacher, and so to get this was stressful, but at the same time was also kind of like, oh, like what I'm doing is making a difference. And for me, I think what is important is to continue to fund, and that representation matters. It matters not only in your classroom, but also in your colleges. And that's a hard thing to sometimes deal with. But no, I think it's just, the more we can have our discipline reflect the larger population, the better off we'll be.
To me, I think I have to second what Jed said. Right now, I think we're in a crisis of staffing and teacher shortages, and so to policymakers, I mean, my wish is that you really take a look at what's happening, and you think about funding, you think about curriculum, how that's being enacted, and see if there's anything we can do, because you know, we can't have a society without educators, and so something I think needs to change in that sense. To all of you, thank you for being here. I think it's people like you and us that are making a difference in education. You guys are here, you know, looking to improve, looking to get better, looking to learn, just like we all are. And I think that's the correct path to continue.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Again, you know, thank everyone here. But really, honestly, it's just to not give up, to keep on doing this. You know, it's very, very hard what we do at all aspects, administration, teaching, I mean, all behind the doors and things. But, you know, you found us. This is a room full of us. You know, these are Noyce scholars and fellows and higher-ups and gods of the universe and things like that. But, you know, not to give up, not to stop because a door closes. You know, me being me, there's a lot of doors that slam in my face. That's okay, there's a window, you know. If not, if you break a hole in the wall, you find your own door, you know. But the point is, you know, just to keep believing in people like us. You know, you found us and you you probably dusted us off and shined us up a little bit, but here we are. And so, you know, not to give up, just to keep on and keep on and keep on. And there's a Navajo saying, it's ayo with the bente, which means to keep on going. And, you know, that's like the only one thing my dad ever did useful for me. You know, that's all he ever told me. And at the time, I said, no, you know, Dad, no. But as an adult, it makes so much sense. And so, you know, that's the same for you guys. Just keep on going. You'll find us. We're here. You know, you'll get one or two of us, but it's enough. It's one or two you didn't have before. So.
All right. I'm going to ask everyone in the audience to just stop and think for a moment, and when you've thought of 2 questions, raise your hands. But everybody has to think of at least 2 questions. All of you. When the whole room has their hands up, then we can start to talk. Okay, well, some of you have to keep thinking. But let's go way in the farthest back. I see some whitish hair there. You. Ask your question, please. Nice and loud. Yep.
Personally, I received none. That's something that I changed. The next teacher that came in, I was their mentor, but that was my second year teaching. So that is also something that I'm now bringing to our administration. We're in the process of developing a mentorship program for our school.
I've talked a little bit about my experience. What Jacksonville Teacher Residency program does is they do a gradual release. So unless you specifically request, I want to teach at 100% this one AP class, like the mad lad I was, typically you start by working with the lesson plan, meeting with your mentor, teaming up with them, and then slowly over the course of the year, like you're a teacher from day one, but you start to take almost full control by the end because you have an entire year to build up those relationships. So the first kind of quarter, I would say, is more about like equitable thinking, equitable actions, relationships is everything. And then by the end of the year, you're capable of doing it all, so that by your first actual year of teaching, you can do it all. My year was a little strange because like the halfway point hit and COVID happened. So we also got like a crash course in online learning and preparing for college board exams. But it was definitely a really awesome opportunity. I would love to hear what you guys have also done.
For me, the program that I did, the Earth Science Residency Program, MAT, Master of Arts in Teaching at the Museum of Natural History, once you're done with everything, you become a teacher, but then you have induction, like you just mentioned, and we meet monthly. We get paired with a mentor teacher from our different cohort who have experience teaching already, and you get to talk to that teacher, your concerns and things like that. You also get to share with other teachers in the induction. You get workshops. You share lesson plans, exit tickets, do nows, and you get feedback from other teachers, experienced teachers, and the teachers from your cohort. So we get a lot of support on that. We meet monthly, and we get compensated for that as well.
Go ahead. Okay. I cheated. I actually worked the school district I work in now 13 years before I went to become a real teacher. I was an educational assistant, and I was an athletic coach. And, in my story, really, honestly, I didn't go to college first. I didn't have a choice. Again, family being family, my dad got hurt. He became paralyzed from the neck down. So I quit college on the spot. I stopped and I went home because I used to live in California. I used to work at Lawrence Livermore National Labs. I was an engineer first, for a couple of years. And so I went home, and that was that. So at the time, where I'm from, there's not a whole lot of anything to do but work for the schools or work at Walmart or whatever. So I'm like, schools it is. So I worked at the school district, and I worked with behavior intervention. I worked with SPED. I worked with bilingual. I worked with gifted, and I worked with regular ed. I worked with everything there was to work with at every school in my district. So I saw it all. So about after my 13th year, finally, by then everybody had it with me. They're like, you need to go back. I'm like, no, it's okay. I'm good, that's fine. But no, I went back, I quit everything, I retired from my district, and I used that money to go back to school. And so whenever it came time to be a teacher, it was kind of interesting because all of those teachers were my teachers. And so it's like I just went back to school again. And it was the weirdest feeling, but it wasn't so hard for me because I just eased into something I had already been a part of. I'd already seen it. And, a lot of it was just the technicality, formality of the lesson planning and the pacing guide and the curriculum and such. But, I didn't feel like it was hard. I didn't get that whole first teacher out of the gun jitters like a lot of you guys probably get or have done. But I didn't get that. Like I said, I kind of cheated. So, but nonetheless, I did the whole lead teacher, co-teacher thing, but for a whole week and a half. And then by then it was like, oh, you're good, bye. And I'm like, thanks for the keys, I'll see you later, But after that, like everybody said, we got the support. We met with everybody who I was supposed to meet with, and it's been good. The support's still there, even now that I'm out of that college and out of that formal program, I still have those connections and that networking, so it's good.
Let's get another question. Yes?
Chicago, and I know a lot of teachers who have had experiences. So my question is, you want me to repeat it? Okay. Okay, so I'll be teaching in Chicago, and I was saying that I know a lot of teachers who have experienced the question that I'm about to ask. And so my question is, how do you guys combat feeling like your administration isn't supporting you and feeling like they don't care about you, you know, things of that nature?
I was born a bull in a china shop, and so I just kind of do it, and then I ask for forgiveness. Probably not the best way to do it, but I'm also in a small school district. I'm one of 2 science teachers in my school. And then I also kind of wanted to go back, because like Camilla said, that last answer probably wasn't very nice, but I did not receive support, but I teach at the same school that I graduated from. So I know a ton of the people there, and so when I first went back to teaching, I ended up finding myself some people that were my mentors. We just didn't have a program in place for it, so sorry, I wanted to go back and correct that.
So I have been in situations where not the horror stories that you hear sometimes, but like close. What I ultimately decided to do was just, as Camilla was saying, like find your own opportunities. When my school was like, we're not giving you paper anymore, even though you still have your stipend, I was like, okay, Donors Choose is accepting art projects for like double the donations. I'm just gonna build this like art integration project and add 3 giant reams of paper, and that should be good. So there are funding opportunities and grants outside of your school district, outside your school in a worst case scenario. I would seek those out because a lot of people don't know they exist. So like outside of things like Donors Choose, just like looking around your local community for community support is crucial, even if that's just having like a list of like, hey, if you have it, tissues would be great. Because I've found that communities, especially like the communities that a lot of us work in, really do want to show up when they can. I was just talking with another teacher earlier today, and she was like, I asked for like gloves for a project, and she had teacher, like parents that were nurses, like smuggling, like asking to smuggle like glove boxes from like the nurse from like the hospitals they worked at. So when you come from very little, you find ways to give back, and when you're in a community that has very little, you have to find those opportunities to give back too. Unfortunately, sometimes admin won't be on your side.
I would say learn some salesman techniques.
That too.
You have to, be able to sell your ideas, especially to administrators, and sometimes it takes a little bit of work. You have to convince them, you have to find data, you have to find reasons for what you're after. And then as she mentioned, sometimes it takes outside of the school, outside of your district, finding other people that you can convince to support you in whatever your endeavors are.
Yeah. I strongly believe that my mom always said it's not what you say, it's how you say it. So not only hearing your own requests for things, but other people who might have the same complaints or the same worries, figuring out how to say that to them, how to get across from them. And it might not be what you think is like, oh, this is a great way to present the information, might not actually be the best, but going back to your program, going back to people who have previously been administrators and see like, how should I go about this? How can I break through this wall is like the best thing that you can do.
Also, I'll say, talk to your UFT or union representative. If you really like the school, you want to stay, but admin is not really on your side, but you really like the school, talk to them. They have answers to things that you then think of. And, also stay close to optimistic teachers, that have a positive, mindset. And, no matter what you're going through, you're always going to find a wise words from them, And last but not least, try to focus on your kids, It's hard, but, you're there for the kids, not really for the adults. So they are the reason that you're there, and they're the reason that you wake up every morning and you want to do this. So.
And the more you bring in like these ideas of bringing in these outside, the more willing your administrator is going to be to work with you. And I think, too, is just remember that as much poop as we give administrators, they're still people. They were usually teachers before and are there hopefully for the same reason that you're there.
Another question out there?
We have one over here.
Hi there. My name is Jess. I'm with Mass Teach in Massachusetts, and I'm not sure if this is the right platform for this question, but I'm going to throw it out there anyways. So I've heard a couple terms from the panel, residency and barrier to entry. So where I'm at in Massachusetts, we don't have something called a residency, and I was just talking to my fellow scholar here about how teachers should be like doctors, and we should get a year of paid internship where we're not going further into debt after completing our undergraduate degree in order to get the skills and mentorship needed to be in the field. It feels like a stab in the back after doing all of this like labor of love for my community to be told that I have to pay for 12 credits in order to enter the field. So I'm wondering, in your residency program, is that like a paid internship? Is it through the state? Is it through the Noyce Foundation? Is it something that you had to seek out, or is that just something that your state offers all new teachers?
That is a great question. For my residency program for Jacksonville Teacher Residency, I got a Master's of Arts in Teaching with a secondary ed with a secondary ed and science focus, and I was very lucky. The way that the funding worked out, mine was completely paid for. I was full-time AmeriCorps, which gave me some of my stipend, and then they had a special like Noyce Fellow Grant scholarship that I got the rest of it covered. So in my almost year, like a little over year-long program, not only was I in the school from day one teaching and co-teaching, but I was also taking classes at the University of North Florida while getting paid for it and having insurance basically paid. It was a really awesome opportunity, and the reason why I ended up picking that opportunity above going to like the University of California to pursue my like at the time dream job of like marine policy and like marine science and marine biology was because it was paid for, and I ended up falling into teaching and loving it. It was a awesome experience.
For my residency program, with Teach Houston, we received the Noyce grant. So because it was an accelerated program, we completed classes and our residency somewhat simultaneously towards the end. And we received our grant, so that helped cover a lot for school and some like outside stuff, you know, we all have bills to pay. And then outside of that, we also, our director was able to help partner us with some districts in our area that were able to fund our residency. So they're paying for us to go student teach in their district, but we also sign a commitment depending like how many years we're going to teach in that district. So we signed a commitment to 2 years to teach within the district that we were student teaching at. It could be anywhere in that district. And then we had like 8 years to complete that 2-year commitment. So we received funding from both.
I should mention that I also signed a paper for like 4-year. I forgot I had to commit for 4 years in my district, and it needed to be a Title I district too.
Similar to then, the residency program, the Earth Science residency program at the American Museum of Natural History, it's a fully funded program. The only thing they ask you is that you dedicate full-time to the program. So I was in a charter school, I was not certified, and they asked me like, you know, you need to just dedicate full-time because it's an accelerated program, it's very intense. And after that, you sign a commitment that you'll teach 4 years in a high-need school. And if you leave, let's say you only teach 2 years or 1 year, you have to pay some of the money back, you know? And then after that, you get induction and then you get compensated. Even though the program is over, you still get some money for attending induction, and sometimes you get special stipends and things like that from Noyce.
Those like Noyce grants after you're already a teacher, just so helpful. Like you're able to just give so much back to your classroom.
I have kind of a different question for you. I think as university professors, I've always said we have a lot of power with our students in encouraging them to go into teaching. And I just wondered, in your role, I have seen, certainly not with you, but with some teachers, I feel that they are the worst advocates for teaching because they complain all the time about teaching, and their students hear them complain about teaching. So I'm curious how you see your role moving forward as advocates for future teachers among your students, the population that you're working with, how you are going to grow them and to be our teachers for tomorrow.
I feel like one of the things that I do is I'm just completely honest with them. I did not see myself being a teacher, but I'm so glad I ended up here. I love my life as a teacher. I love the turn that it has made for the better. And then I just tell them my story, let them know where I came from, what my life was like before teaching, and what my life is like now with teaching, and that everything you do in life is going to come with challenges, but you get to pick and choose what those challenges are. And I'm completely honest with them in the fact that when I was in high school, I couldn't wait to get out of the place. I was thinking every day, like, what teacher would want to sit here for work every day? And these boring walls, these terrible lights, like, this is just terrible. But here I am. And I actually love it. So I feel like it's finding what you like and what you're good at and applying it to teaching. Because you could be a great communicator and make an awesome teacher. You could be a great innovator and make awesome lesson plans. Like, there's so many different aspects that you can do. And I was a restaurant manager, and everything that I learned there helped me manage a lot of kids and a lot of personalities and parents. And so anything that you like doing, you can do in the classroom. You just got to find where that's at and where your avenue is.
I definitely agree. The go-to story I tell my kids is before I was teaching, I was in Alaska on a cliff doing salmon surveys, and I fell off the cliff, sprained my ankle, and was no longer able to look at the salmon that I thought were the most beautiful thing in the entire world. And instead, I was at a visitor center teaching people, and that was my first introduction, was in this visitor center in Alaska, which I ended up loving, but so many people would come in, and none of them knew, like a lot of them didn't know English. They would just all come on a cruise ship that was entirely in Yiddish or entirely in like Spanish, and I had to learn really fast that hands-on experiences, just like they had been for me. Like the same reason why I liked looking at the salmon and I liked petting the bunnies was like the same thing that my kids were craving, was those hands-on, like actual experiences, and that like made everything so much easier. Like when I was like, oh, if I can't go to the ocean, I should just bring the ocean to them. And like they weren't always able to handle the labs, but patience and like being like, here are the rituals, here are the routines, we're gonna try this one more time. Kids learned pretty fast. They're like, whoa, 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 we should give Mrs. Mazzano like some credit. Like she just got like all these cool rocks. Maybe we shouldn't throw them around. Like that was, hands-on experiences definitely turned around my classroom. It was so much easier after the pandemic.
We're a culture of teachers. You know, that's how we learn. Our language, our traditions, everything. We're very visual people. And so my kids, I always just tell them to tap into what they already know, what's already there. And, you know, from the native perspective, you know, that's how we learn. We learn by showing, we learn by doing. And there are very, very few things that use words. Like when my mom was teaching me the chores of the home, she would just tell you once, this is what we do. And then she would give you whatever you needed and she would show it to you. No words, just coaxing you, leading you, showing you, and then that was that. And then after a while, you were doing it on your own. You know, and same for the chores outside. I wasn't a boy, but my dad had girls, so he didn't have a choice but to teach us too. And with him, he wasn't a man of many words anyway. He was more like pointing, slapping, and do it again, you know, and it's like, oh, I did it wrong, shoot, you know. But and that's what I tell our kids is, you know, you're in a culture of teaching. That's what we do. How many of you have your grandma and grandpa just slap at you and just point at you and, you know, tell you one time and you're like, oh my gosh, I didn't hear it. So you have to wait for the slap and then like, oh, I know what to do, and so a lot of those kids, they understand that. And so when in my class anyway, I just tell them, it's like, learn to teach others, listen to each other and show each other, because you don't want to talk to each other, so just show each other what to do. And so we kind of just tap into that cultural aspect, and it leaks over into my Spanish kids, and it leaks over into the non-native kids, and they all understand that because they're the same way now. We're in a very, very visual type of world where everything is on a screen and everything's in front of us. So they understand that doing it on their own and showing rather than talking just seems to be easier for them. So that's what we do, and that's how I go about it.
I picked up teaching later in life. I'm 39. I've been teaching for 3 years. I worked in IT for a long time before I joined the education world. And I think a big part of, my mind just went blank. Sorry. I never thought I'd be a teacher. I ended up walking by a classroom at a college, and they were having a conversation about some nerdy science stuff. I stuck my head in, and I talked to her about 30 minutes, and she said, "You should be a teacher." And I said, "Oh, that sounds horrible." And then I started teaching, and I fell in love with it. I think I'm like a life vampire from my teenage students. Like they come in and I just like absorb, like even when they're not in the best mood. So I think a big part of it is teaching's hard. There are going to be times where you need to vent to your coworkers, to people that are around you. I just try to be very cognizant of where we're doing that and where I am and who's present, because I am also in a very, very small town. So I think that for the best indicator for my students is seeing me in the classroom. We just have fun. I mean, like, people walk by my class and we're laughing. Water's being sprayed. And I mean, it's just, I'm happy to be there, and I'm trying to get them to be happy to be there. And I think that's the best kind of motivator, to have them also join that career.
I think for me, I feel lucky to be in high school, because I feel, especially at that age, and although it probably applies to really any age level, students, you can really shape their minds. You can really impact them if you give them the right sort of motivation. And when thinking about the need for teachers and teachers of color and just more people out in this field, you just have to motivate them. You just have to talk to them, tell them, make them aware of all the issues that are happening in education, and tell them that you can see them being a solution to it. That's all going to make a big impact. And I think, schools also have some like educator rising programs. That's something that my school has that kind of helps students prepare them for education. And my school is like 85% minority students, so a lot of them have never seen teachers like them in education. But throughout these sort of programs, they get to kind of witness how they are capable of doing these sort of things.
For me, I'm thinking about three things real quick. One of them, to motivate students to join the force, join teaching, is just by teaching with passion. They see your passion and they get inspired. I want to be like Mr. Garcia. It's just the passion. That's something that you cannot, go to school for. The way you teach, the way you talk, the way you present the things to them. Second thing is that I always tell them, like, a doctor, an engineer, and they all went through a teacher. This is a privileged position here. All professionals in the world, scientists in NASA, everywhere, they went through a teacher. And the last thing, which is one of the greatest things, is the salary and the benefits. You get summer off and paid. All my friends, they're forensics, police officers. I have a couple of friends. They're always jealous. Like, how you get paid? How you get summer pay? How is that? Become a teacher, and the great benefits that you get from being a teacher. Not only summer, but all the days off, vacation, all the support, and the knowledge that you get. You always constantly studying, constantly reading things. if you really want to be an effective teacher.
And teaching is the only job that you can, well, not the only job, but one of many jobs that you can do anywhere in the world.
Yes.
Yes.
So, even virtually, if that's your choice.
Hello. So I know you guys have mentioned like there's different personalities and like having to vent to other teachers. So, cause I grew up in Houston and I'm from A-Leaf, I know some of the students can be like really ruthless. So have you guys ever had to deal with basically a student that you and their personality just clashes, or like they're just being rude and blatant disrespectful? If you have, how have you dealt with that? Or what would be the best way to go about that? Cause from what I've seen, it's never been a positive experience.
So I have a really good answer to this one. So I'm not going to use his real name because we're not going to go there. But like, let's say that his name was Darius. Darius was, oh boy, he was a character. And I'll never forget him. I was trying to go over like the lab directions, and all the other students were just excited that we were finally doing a lab, because I was like, okay, rituals and routines are here, we can finally do something. So I was passing out like the lab information, and suddenly Darius just jumps like Dead Poet Society style, like onto his desk, and is like, I know what we all need. We need teachers to leave the room. Student uprising. I'm tired of hearing teachers talk and complain. They're the worst. Everything's the worst. I hate it here. Who's with me? Let's start a riot. And like all the others. Yeah, no, Darius was great. And I was like, man, this is my first year teaching, and I already have. And all the other students just like looked at him, looked at me, and like looked back at him because they all wanted to do the lab. And I just like looked at him and was like, you know what? You're right. I don't think I ever told you what your dream was. And he then, still standing on the table, looked at me when I'm going to be the president of the United States one day. And I was like, awesome. You already got the communication skills. You already got the leadership. Like, how about you come and help me set up this lab? And from that day on, like Darius was still a menace to like his classmates, but he was never disrespectful to me again. And I think that that's something to really keep in mind, especially when you're teaching in a class, like in a school that's so diverse and comes from so many different backgrounds to you. Try to like see it from their side. Maybe you are being the unfair one sometimes.
I think a thing that works or that's very helpful for me is bring in a third person. I had a group of students, young Native men in my first year teaching, that we had some conflicts, and we ended up doing some restorative justice. And so I had our counselor facilitate it. We were able to sit down, and I kind of said, well, this is, how I see things are going in the classroom, and they were able to say how they felt things were going in the classroom. And we realized that neither of us were really talking about the same thing. And so what ended up coming out of it is we really didn't come to much of a, we agreed that everybody was it was a shared kind of issue, but that just the willingness for me to sit down and listen to them and hear them, what their side of the situation was, those young men then became like my best champions in the school. They would do things for me that I probably do not want them to do. And to this day, I still have them. So I think it's really just, as hard as it is, it's being open and being willing to have those conversations that are sometimes not the most fun to have.
Yeah, I feel like it's being your students' like biggest advocate in many different situations. And when I think about my students, I think about yourself as like a high school kid. There were so many teachers I was so frustrated with for many different things, but it really had nothing to do with any of my teachers or any of my classes, but everything to do with what was going on at home or at work or with my friends. And so I feel like when you do have those moments, those outbursts, those kids who make a big scene or just constantly cause you strife throughout however long you let it go on, pulling them out of the class, listening to them, just being completely honest and being vulnerable. And a lot of things that people don't want to do is apologize. But if you apologize first, they're more willing to be like, oh, I'm right. And even if they're not 100% right about the situation, they're going to respect you so much for it. And then they're going to appreciate you. And then while everybody else thinks that they're getting like nagged on outside, just let them know like after this conversation is over, be like, okay, and then after class, I'm going to have you stay after, but I have a snack for you. And when everybody else thinks they're in trouble, they're in there getting snacks from you, and they're like the happiest person. And like you're saying, they do everything for you. They become your biggest advocates, your best friends. They're in your class every single day, and we're like, no, I'm sorry, I'm still Miss Morris. Like, you can't call me by my first name. But I feel like it's just listening to them and letting them understand that you're going to help them do what they need to do at that age, as far as like communicating with other teachers about their problems, communicating with the APs. When they go up there and they go off on the administration, and you can say, well, really what they meant to say was, and then showing them how to properly communicate with adults, because you don't even know what their home life is like, and if they've even gotten that for themselves, so how would they know how to reciprocate it to somebody else?
Yeah. Unconditional positive regard.
Yeah. Don't give up on students. I think that's the biggest thing for me. Teaching is a job, and I think we can all agree it has its ups and downs. And when you think about a particular student, behaviors happen for a reason, and as a few others already mentioned, part of the job is figuring out what their needs are and why these behaviors are happening. Sometimes it's quick, sometimes it takes more work, but you just have to be mindful of that. You have to keep grinding. You have to keep working, knowing that if you keep just showing them kindness, showing them that you care, things will turn around. And then just don't be afraid to ask for help. Every once in a while, that's kind of what you need.
Yeah, just give them a place. A lot of those kids who are upset and angry and screaming at you are a little ball of emotions. It's just because they're overlooked. They're part of large groups or large families, and sometimes they get skipped over. So when they're in school and they're acting out and they're screaming at you in your face or kicking you, just like, at least you know they're there because you're yelling at them and you're specifically paying attention to them in that moment. But, for those kids who often are very, very angry and upset, like a lot of us said, they just bring it with them. And then you're just the unfortunate soul that gets unloaded on. But at the same time, you just make them feel like they're there and speak to them and only them. And if you need an extra man in, bring the extra man in. It's normally, there is at least 2 people in the universe they actually like. Find the other person in the universe and try to, figure out the small things to do to make them okay in your space. And then eventually, work it out with the rest of the school. But, because then they're your space and they exploded in your space, worry about your space first. And then branch out. And if they want the help, normally they're really good about telling you after they're done crying and after they're done eating and things, what happened, what brought them to this point. And they're very quick to share. Believe it or not, they really are. So, just let them know that you're there and you see them and they're a part of your little universe, and you miss them when they're not there, and you know when they're there, and you greet them and things like that, and personalize your time with them. And it really does flourish in great ways. It does.
To quickly add on to Camilla's points, you'll find, like for the pre-service teachers out there, I never believed my mentor teacher when she said this, but the students that are going to give you the hardest time, take it as a teacher who's going into her 3rd year, those are the students. Given that you never give up on them, they're going to come back. They're going to be the ones knocking on your door, and they might not be emotionally mature enough to say everything they want to still, but they'll be like, I'm moving away next week, and I just wanted to tell somebody, I wanted to tell you. And that's when you know that you're doing a good job. They'll never tell it to you when you're teaching them. It'll be years later. But they will come back, and you'll never forget your first one that does.
And don't take anything personally. I mean, well, if you had a role in it, yes, take responsibility for that, but understand that a lot of what they are saying are these outbursts that are coming from somewhere else.
So I was wondering, in a world that is ever-changing, technology-wise, I was really thinking about this earlier whenever Dr. Noyce was talking about everything at the start, how a lot of our students have grown so attached to their phones. I was wondering if there's a way that we could actually utilize that, possibly, or even just if students have personal laptops or iPads or whatever that's being handed out to them. I feel like a lot of times teachers don't really encourage the use of that. Sometimes I've seen in math environments they'll use Desmo, so they'll say, Google this or that or something like that. But I feel like there's not like a lot of like higher level, higher grade use of technology, and I was wondering what you would say to encourage that sort of higher level use of technology in the classroom.
So depending on what subject you teach, there's a lot of stuff. I'm going to stick to STEM because that's what I know. If you're a math teacher who likes using flipped classrooms, Khan Academy saved me. When I was teaching AP Biology, their stuff's fantastic. They even have questions afterwards that are differentiated. If you're about gamification, which is usually what I do in my classes, Blookit, Blooket, is an amazing, it's like a better Kahoot. So like in Kahoot, a lot of like the kids who already know everything just click the option and the kids are like, what did you put? Did you put triangle? Blookit gamifies it. So there's some strategy involved. So sometimes it's not always the kids that know all the answers that win. If there's some strategy involved, and you can make it self-paced. It's kind of like if you took Kahoot and quizzes and made it a game, combined it together. And I found that that was amazing for differentiation because you could pick something that has like a ton of questions, right? Get them used to like certain different things. You could even make your own data sets, and like the students who are higher exceptionalities would be able to work at their own pace, and the kids who maybe need a partner to work out problems, they could team up with somebody and kind of do it on either a computer or a phone that way. Lots of cool stuff out there. And PhET Labs is great for science teachers. They're virtual labs. And this costs money, but Kessler Science, if you're a rotating stations person like I am, fantastic. They have everything planned for you. All the resources are there, and you can edit them too. So if you wanted to, again, differentiate, you could, and they even have like a easier level reading sheet already available and a harder reading sheet available that you could just print on both sides and flip it so that kids don't even know they're getting like the hard. Yeah, it's great. So all of those resources, perfect for utilization of phones. If you're going, especially if you're a middle school teacher, if you're going to have phones in the classroom or computers in the classroom, make sure that there's rules for when they're allowed and when they're not. I used to have like a phone bank so that students could charge their phones and put them away if it was not Blookit time, because if kids get really attached to games, so they'll start finding other games, and that can be a slippery slope fast.
I guess I try to approach it. We've had issues at my school recently. We're actually moving to not having phones allowed in the classroom next year. But we now have enough devices for every student to have one in the school. Thank you, COVID. The thing that I try to teach is digital citizenship and then also digital like hygiene, right? There are appropriate times to use your phone and there are inappropriate times to use your phone. Do you ever see me using my phone when I'm in front of you teaching? No. So then I expect you not to use your phone when you are doing something that I'm asking you to complete in class. Are there times when I will allow you to use your phone? Yeah, I think that phone is an excellent tool, and it's something that as a scientist you're going to need, and most scientists use it. So I just kind of try to break it down and take it back to that point of, especially with COVID, a lot of our students developed habits and ways of interacting with technology that maybe aren't the most healthy, and so it's even framing it in that way of like, hey, this is just from a health standpoint, mental health, physical health, like there are ways that this is not being beneficial for you, and a lot of them, no one's really talked to them about those kinds of things. So I think giving it a little bit of awareness, and then modeling, so.
Yeah, being a technology major, like I feel like I'm a big advocate for using different tools and technology within the classroom as well, because the things that kids can do with it are amazing. And so in the University of Wyoming did a PD with technology and how to apply it to the science and math classrooms, and they sent us drones, and it's so cool. I feel like as far as like technology aspect, there's so many different websites and resources that we probably all have available to us that we can post links to in our wonderful app, so everybody can have access to those links. And then where you can go through and click on them and see what might work for your classroom, whether it be in math or science or any of the STEM related classes.
was thinking also, like, that's a great point that you bring on. Sometimes creating a list of all those websites and high order, technology, devices and things that teachers could use. That's something that, we do at our program, to create that list and provide it to teachers, and they can have access to all those things and, benefit from knowing. Some of us might know, programs that others will not know, and that's something very important, like you guys are mentioning right now. That way we have access to a bunch of resources.
And I'd say anytime you can wrap that technology into a project. I do SCAPE, Sustainable Communities and Place-Based Education. So it's basically attaching anything that I'm teaching to the local area. And I've found that if I am attaching it locally and then I'm including, to do science, you have to use technology to a pretty high level. And so they are actually doing all of that science themselves. And it's usually for a purpose, like we're trying to, revitalize the river, or we're trying to make sure that we have a spot for bull trout to spawn. So I think those are all excellent ways.
So Dr. Noyes, thank you so much for leading the panel. We have like 2 minutes left if you want to ask one last question, or if you would like for them to give a closing statement. Thank you.
Let me think about that. I was supposed to think of 2 questions too, right?
All right.
What is the first thing you're going to do in your classroom when you go back in September?
Put all the desks back. We had this major floor renovation or whatever, so all my desks are on my lab tables, and they're like, "Hey, guess what? You got to take them down yourself." I'm like, "Aw." So that's my first job.
The first thing I'm going to do, I'm actually going from middle school to high school, same district, same school district, but different. So just going through everything I learned my first year and looking at the curriculum, seeing if I still agree with what I did back when I first started, is definitely something that I'm probably going to do. I'm trying not to do it until August, and it's a sinking ship. I've already looked once, so that's probably going to be the first thing I do.
For me, I think the first couple weeks are going to be all about just motivating them and making sure that they feel like they belong in my classroom. I'll be teaching math and computer science, which historically are classes that you see a certain demographic of students more than others, and a lot of my students have never been in those sort of classes. So you just have to make sure they're all feeling welcome and telling them that they belong there.
I'm going to be preparing for field work. We teach a Montana Natural History class that is field work based. And so my couple first weeks back are going to be getting all of my field trips set up, making sure I have the bus, doing all that kind of fun stuff. I'm also in a 40-year-old classroom, maybe older than that, which I've which I've purged in the last 2 years. So I'm super excited to go in and label and reorganize.
I feel like, same as mentioned, building those connections with the students the first week, that's my biggest thing. And I have so many students that at the end of this past year were like, "Oh, can we come back and talk to them and tell them not to be like this the first week?" And I'm like, "Yes, please do." They're going to want to know somebody who's an upperclassman, and they're going to want to, they learn better from their peers than they do from us anyways. So getting them in there to speak to my students and telling them, let them speak for me and tell them how I am, who I am, and also let them speak to their peers about what this class is going to be like, because I do think this next group of students is going to get a different experience because we're all growing, learning, and improving. So just seeing how I can up the ante for next year.
For me, when I come back to my classroom, I'll show them definitely pictures about this event. Myself presenting, probably show them the video that will come up. Also, having pictures of me, where I'm coming from, my background, and all my struggles until where I'm now. That'll be very impactful for them, so I'll show them that.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Dr. Noyes. Thank you so much. Please give a hand clap for our inspirational teachers.